Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome to End Times 101 on Grok Radio. I'm your host tonight, Minister Grok. We got a great show planned for you tonight. Tonight we're going to be joined by best-selling author William Federer. He's been on tons of shows and has traveled around the country talking about the truth about Islam. Tonight we're going to be discussing the history, beliefs, and what we need to know about the Quran. So, before we do that, though, while we're waiting for people to kind of get in the live chat room, we're going to start out with a song. And if you're listening and you're not in the chat room, come join us at CYIWorldwide.com. Under Grok Radio, click on chat. It's absolutely free. Just pick a username and come on in and join us. All right, let's start off with a song. This is Dark City by Ninja Scroll.
I've got one that can see.
Yeah, I said we waging war. Fed up with this mess, I can't take no more. We've been lied to straight up from the door. History is his story, and that's for sure. We've been led down the wrong path, walking blind. Taught just to obey, don't use your mind. Evil globalists, them conniving swine. Got you all coked up and drunk on wine. It's the land of the lost, we surrounded by sleep stacks. Corrupt money makers that rob with fed tax. The backs of us poor men will soon be broke. Work your fingers through the bone, still feel no hope. Turn on the TV just so you can cope. Hypnotized and deceived by the fake news folks. Like I'm in a dark city, but I awoke. In the middle of their mind control plans, a cruel joke. You've been asleep so long that you never even noticed the change. Got your mind hypnotized with your program lies. And the thing that they do is strange. You believe what they tell you to believe. In the system, part of the game. It's a dark city out there, but you still don't care. Fascinated by the fame. I feel like we're in a world that's completely dark, no sunshine. Complete total dark, 7 days at a time. More than half of the world sleep when they doing crime. If you awake, people say, man, you lost your mind. You're sick, facing talk 32nd degrees. Don't want to hear any more conspiracy theories. But the fact is, Adolf Hitler tried to rule with no cash and poor education in school. You'd be a fool to believe the elite in this world. Don't want to fool every man, woman, boy, or girl. Born with a silver spoon in their mouth, then want more. Squeeze out the middle class, only rich and poor. Communism, fascism, socialism, insane. Made slaves of us all, that's the whole end game. Big control since birth, cradle to the grave. I'd rather die fighting for my rights than live as a slave. You've been asleep so long that you never even noticed the change. Got your mind hypnotized with your program lies. And the thing that they do is strange. You believe what they tell you to believe. In the system, part of the game. It's a dark city out there, but you still don't care. Fascinated by the fame.
Here comes Mr. Quick, ready to implant my next life. This time, no kids, single man, no wife. Got me a job in a hotel, renting rooms. Thought you was a rich man, now you pushing brooms. Is it crazy or insane for me to assume they've been messing with my brain, trying to keep me in tune? All groups talking me, trying to make me paranoid, or brainwashing me so my life is void. Psychological warfare, is this all true? Can they mind control people if they want to? Are the thoughts that I'm thinking really mine? In fact, is this really me? Is this how I really act? Have my views been shaped by TV and movies and music? You think Satan really would use this to make evil men go and use them this way? Remind me again what the Taylor Swift say? It's a thought that's completely insane. Like I'm gonna let my kids be raised by Lil Wayne or Jay-Z or Kanye West or Lady Gaga and end up on crack with baby mama drama. To some, this is based on a true story, like they've been trained just like shit their whole life. This whole world's fabricated. If this was on TV, it wouldn't be PG, but R-rated.
You've been asleep so long that you never even noticed the change. Got your mind hypnotized with your program lies. And the thing that they do is strange. You believe what they tell you to believe. In the system, part of the game. It's a dark city out there, but you still don't care. Fascinated by the fame.
Hey folks, it's Will ZPI, and you guys got to check out CYIWorldwide.com, home of the Grok Show, free MP3s, music, advice, and even prayer support. That again is CYIWorldwide.com. Check it out.
All right, welcome back. Thank you for joining us tonight. Be sure to check out all the great programming all week here on CYIWorldwide.com. Tomorrow night, Wednesday evening, is Holy Joe's Cafe, best of Christian music, news, and culture. So don't miss out on that one, because that one's always a really cool one. All right. William J. Federer is a national-known speaker, best-selling author, and president of AmeriSearch Incorporated, a company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage. He has appeared on shows such as C-SPAN, Fox, Hannity and Combs, O'Reilly Factor, NPR, MSNBC, CBN, TBN, The 700 Club, and the list goes on and on and on. And in addition, he has written many books, and one of his biggest one is What Christians Need to Know About the Quran. So let's go ahead and start out our show tonight. All right, now, without further ado, let's bring on our guest. We'd like to welcome to the Grok Show, William Federer. Welcome.
Hey, great to be with you, Minister Grok.
I appreciate you taking the time and joining us tonight. It's a real honor.
Well, it's a very important topic, and I've put together several books and DVDs on it. One of them is entitled What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam and the United States, and then a DVD titled Islamic Conquest, Past and Present. And so we get to look back at 1,400 years of history and examine this religious, political, military system.
And, you know, a lot of people are woefully unaware of what Islam is about, how it got started, and really what they believe. We in this country, we're in this politically correct nonsense where we have to, you know, accept everyone and be, tolerant of everything. And you know, there's this lie propagated that Islam is this religion of peace. How do you respond to kind of what the media is putting out there right now?
Well, Islam is a religion of peace, but the question is, what is the definition of the word peace? In our definition, peace is when different groups learn how to get along.
Right.
Well, in the fundamental Islamic definition, is when the whole world submits to the will of Allah, there will be peace. So in other words, to them, world peace means world Islam. So their roadmap for peace with Israel is to have Israel submit to Allah. In other words, they want to force conversion on it. And
right.
So a moderate Muslim thinks the world will submit to Allah later, maybe at the end of the world, maybe it's figurative, and since it's so far off in the distant future, just get along with the infidel, and they can live next door to you, and they are happy to be in a democratic society.
Right.
The fundamental Muslim, on the other hand, they think the world is submitting to Allah now, and they're really excited, and they want to help make it happen. Now, the dilemma for us in the West is that the more we bend over backwards in unprecedented ways to show ourselves tolerant of Islam, the more the moderate Muslim begins to rethink and say, wait a second, maybe the world is in fact submitting to Allah now rather than later. And so they gravitate from the future peaceful moderate camp into the fundamental now camp, which is the violent camp. So all of our efforts to be hyper-tolerant is actually creating more violence. And the best way to understand it is to look at Muhammad's life. He's the DNA. So Muslims today that want to be better Muslims or be more devout Muslims, they're wanting to be like Muhammad. Matter of fact, all of Sharia law is halals and harams. Halal means permitted, and haram means not permitted. It's all based on Muhammad. What Muhammad permitted is permitted. That's called halal. What Muhammad did not permit is not permitted. That's called haram. So, for example, Muhammad liked cats. So cats are halal. They are permitted. Muhammad did not like dogs. Dogs are haram. They are not permitted. So you go to Saudi Arabia, you see lots of cats and no dogs. But it's all based on Muhammad's preferences. So we have to examine Muhammad's life to understand those that are trying to imitate his life. Sort of like Christians, we have WWJD, what would Jesus do, right? Well, in Islam, they have Muhammad's life is the Sunnah. It's the way, the example. So Muhammad's life went through 3 stages. He was a religious leader for 12 years in the pagan city of Mecca and only made 70 converts in 12 years. He was a little frustrated that not very many people were converting, and so he gets new verses from his Allah to warn the infidel of judgment. And so he hangs around the Kaaba, this square building in Mecca, and he begins to tell these pagans that they're going to burn in hell and all their ancestors are burning in hell. And from their point of view, he's insulting them and he's disrupting their services, and they decide they've had enough of him, and they decide to chase him out of town in the year 624 A.D. So in 624 A.D., Muhammad flees north 210 miles to a Jewish city called Medina. The Jews in Medina were in 3 different tribes. They never really got along with each other, but they were nice enough to let Muhammad in as a religious refugee, as an immigrant. He needed a place to stay. He was chased out of his hometown. They were nice. They let him in. Muhammad presents his faith to the Jews, and they reject him. And so he decides to change the direction of bowing from Jerusalem to Mecca. That's right. He originally had his followers bowing toward Jerusalem, but when the Jews rejected him, he turned it toward Mecca, and he goes into the pagan neighborhoods now that he's bowing toward their city, and he begins to make converts amongst these minorities. He sort of acts like a community organizer in this minority pagan neighborhood in this Jewish-controlled city. He says, you don't have a voice, those Jews control the government, and so he organizes these minority people, and he gets about 1,000 followers. He goes back to the Jewish leaders, and he presents himself as a candidate of change. He's a newcomer to the city, so he says that he can rise above the tribal partisanship that's been going on for centuries, and he can be objective and fair. So the Jews make a treaty with Muhammad, and he becomes a political leader in Medina as well as a religious leader. Then something happens. Muhammad's followers back in Mecca get a little pushy, argumentative, threatening, confrontational, the way some of his followers are today. And the pagans in Mecca decide that they're disrupting the peace of the city, so they chase them out. Well, they flee north to Medina, where Muhammad is now a political leader, and Muhammad permits his followers to rob the caravans headed to Mecca in retaliation for the Meccans chasing him out of town. And so sort of like where Jesus said, if they take your coat, give them your shirt, Muhammad said, if they take your house, you retaliate, you take their caravan. He had a whole chapter of the Quran, chapter 8, on how to distribute booty from robbing caravans. And so in the year 624 A.D., the Meccans send 1,000 soldiers to protect their caravan, and Muhammad, with 300 warriors, defeats 1,000. And so this amazing victory, having been outnumbered 3-1, convinces Muhammad that his Allah wants him to be a military leader. And he goes off to fight in 66 battles and raids in the next 8 years before he dies. He leads 27 of them. He even used the catapult when he attacked a city called Al-Taif. And when he was told the catapult was killing innocent women and children, Muhammad's response was, they are among them. So they got to be killed too. So suicide bombers today say it's okay to kill innocent women and children to advance Islam because Muhammad did. And since Muhammad's the perfect Muslim, Muslims today that want to be better Muslims, they want to be like him religiously, politically, and militarily. And so that's why the closer they follow his example, the more they gravitate toward violence. And so, again, to recap, he's a religious leader from 610 A.D. to 622 A.D. in Mecca. He flees in 622 A.D. to Medina, and then he becomes a political leader. And then in 624 A.D., when the Meccans send their 1,000 soldiers and he defeats them with 300, he becomes a military leader. And so it's sort of like RPM in your car, revolutions per minute. Islam is an RPM. It's a religious system, a political system, and a military system. So there's freedom for all religions in America, but Islam is not just a religion. It's a political system with laws that govern behavior, and it's a military system with 1,400 years of conquest. And so we look at it, again, picking up with Muhammad's life. In the year 627 A.D., the Meccans, their economy is being crushed because of the robbing of the caravans. So they have a last-ditch effort. They get 10,000 soldiers. These are pagans and nomads and Jews, and they all get together, and they march from Mecca to Medina to stop Muhammad from robbing their caravans. Well, it turns out Muhammad is a brilliant military leader, primarily because he does not play by the rules. In other words, these pagans had 1 month a year where they agreed not to fight amongst themselves. It was sort of like their Ramadan month. And they would all go to Mecca on pilgrimage. Well, Muhammad would get verses from Allah telling him it's okay to attack them during their Ramadan month. So here they did not expect to be attacked. Muhammad attacks them, comes away with a lot of booty. Well, Muhammad's version of roadside bombs and IEDs was he dug potholes and trenches all around the city of Medina. And so when the Meccans show up with their 10,000-man army and their horses and their camels, lo and behold, you can't charge your horse and camel across a field full of potholes and trenches while you're being shot at from the walls, and it throws off their whole battle strategy because the horses will break their legs. And so Muhammad goes to some of the tribes and he bribes them and they slip away in the night. He goes to some of the other tribes and he threatens them and they slip away in the night. Sort of the Chicago politics, the bribe or the bullet. And then there's just the Meccan tribes left by themselves. It gets freezing cold for a week. The Meccans lose heart and decide to give up and bring their troops home. And when the Meccans withdraw and bring their troops home, instead of Muhammad reciprocating and saying that he's going to become nice now, instead he's emboldened because his enemies were cowards and they could not subdue him. So now he goes back into the city of Medina, into those Jewish neighborhoods, and now there's nobody that can come to these Jews' rescue. The Meccans were the only ones, and they were cowards. So Muhammad is now strong. He gets offended at one of the Jewish tribes, confiscates their property, and chases them out of town. He gets offended at that second Jewish tribe, confiscates their property, chases them out of town. And it's sort of interesting how brilliant he was with politics, because he picked on the first one that the other two didn't like. And when he chased them out of town, the other two stood around and let it happen, thinking, we never liked that tribe. They had it coming to them. They were bad to us, and, yeah, this is their punishment. Well, then Muhammad picks on the weaker of the last two, and the stronger one says, I never liked that tribe. They were always a thorn in my side. And so they stood around. Finally, there's only one tribe left. And Muhammad bottles them in their neighborhood for 25 days. When they finally surrender, he takes them into the market and chops off their heads, 600 or 700 of them, and then he sells the women and children into slavery.
Great religious leader.
He did keep one of the wives for himself, Rayhana. He ended up having anywhere from 11 to 22 wives. He had slave wives and concubines. And slavery turns out to be one of the main ways that Islam is financed for 1,400 years. They enslaved over 180 million Africans in the 1,400 years of Islam. They'd castrate the men, make them eunuchs, and sell the women into the sex trade. They had African slavery for 7 centuries before the Europeans discovered the New World. So slavery didn't start with Europeans getting Africans. They started for 7 centuries earlier with the Muslims enslaving the Africans. And then they enslaved over 1 million Europeans. They captured them from Greek islands, from Italian coasts, from Spain and Portugal. Even one of the pilgrim ships was captured by the Muslims in 1625. It was filled full of 800 pounds of beaver skins that they sent back to England, and the Muslims captured it in the English Channel, took it to Morocco, sold the crew into slavery. Muslims captured an entire Irish village, the stolen village of Baltimore, Ireland, in 1630, and took them to Morocco. Only 2 ever made it back. They captured 400 from Reykjavik, Iceland in 1627, came up and captured them. And finally, the king of Denmark sent a fleet down to Morocco to rescue some girl who was the daughter of some royal family. But there were entire Catholic orders in Europe called Trinitarians. The head of the order was called the ransomer, and they would collect alms and donations across Europe and go into North Africa to try to get your friend back. So slavery was, again, one of the main ways that Islam is financed. And lo and behold, there is more slavery today than at any other time in world history, and a large percentage of it is in Muslim countries. In Niger, Mauritania, Sudan, the Arab Muslims would capture the Africans and so forth. But anyway, back to Muhammad's life. He immigrates into this Jewish city of Medina in the year 622 A.D. Within 5 years of him coming in as an immigrant into this Jewish city, there's not a Jew left in the city. They were either chased out, killed, or enslaved. And so this process is he immigrates, he increases, he eliminates the previous culture. So sort of Caesar's 3 steps were Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. Right. Muhammad's 3 steps were immigrate, increase, eliminate. So he immigrated to the Jewish city. He increased the number of his followers amongst the discriminated minorities. And then he eliminated the previous culture by chasing out the Jews and the pagans, for that matter. And so this process of immigrating, increasing, and eliminating is being used today in Europe and in neighborhoods around America. So we look at Paris. There are 751 neighborhoods around Paris that the Muslims have completely taken over. And they're called zonas urbanas sensibles, sensitive urban zones. And you ask yourself, how did the Muslims take over these neighborhoods? The first ones came in as immigrants, and they were nice, and they were really nice. And people said, I met them, they're nice, let more in. More come in, they gravitate together, and they get an imam who teaches them, follow the Quran closer, don't be friends with the infidels, don't eat the haram food, ladies start wearing the burqas and the veils, build the mosques, and start blocking off the streets and disrupting the traffic and broadcasting your prayers, and pretty soon people think the neighborhood is changing and they move out. And those that refuse to move out, that's when violence takes place and there's no witnesses, because no Muslim will testify against another Muslim on behalf of a kafir infidel. And so they've immigrated, they've increased, and they eliminate 751 neighborhoods. The number one name given to newborns in London, England, is Mohammed. They've designated 12 neighborhoods around London to take over and make into Muslim emirates. We're talking Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester. They put up signs saying Sharia law is practiced here, and ladies, you better not walk in there unless you're covered or you got a male relative with you. Wow. And then Holland, 25% of Brussels is now Muslim, and they throw rocks at the police and point lasers at their eyes, and the police won't even go into the Muslim neighborhoods even if there's a fire unless they have an escort. And the number one name given to newborns in Belgium is Mohammed. 10 years ago, there were 3 mosques in Germany. Today, there are over 200. And the president of Turkey met with 100,000 of them in a stadium a few years ago and said, don't assimilate, you're here to take over. So Angela Merkel last year, the chancellor of Germany, said multiculturalism has failed, utterly failed. She said you should not come to our country unless you're going to embrace our Christian ethic and our culture and our language. And then we look at Norway, Sweden, Denmark. The number one crime is rape. Muslim immigrant men raping European women. Why? Because Muhammad permitted his men to rape the women that they take in battle. There are blonde-haired Swedish girls dyeing their hair black so they won't get targeted and raped. Then we look at the Netherlands. Nearly all of southern Holland is Moroccan Muslim. And this process of immigrating and then increasing and then eliminating the previous culture is very effective. You move into the country taking advantage of the freedom of religion, and then you organize politically and militarily, neighborhood by neighborhood, then province by province, and then finally you get a huge area like Chechnya and say, we demand to be an Islamic country, and if you don't, we're going to blow up the subways and kill your kids in school. And it's, again, a very effective strategy. So we have a saying, past behavior is the best indicator of future performance.
Exactly.
So if you're going to hire somebody for a job, how did they do on their last job, right? You look at this. Well, we have 1,400 years of past behavior. So there's really no mystery as to what goes on. And when you understand the three phases, the first phase is they're supposed to be nice. They're supposed to look like you, dress like you, talk like you. And to be honest, most of them don't see the whole picture. They just see what's better for them, and they want to move into the neighborhood because it's better for them. Sort of like today, maybe a worker votes for a political party simply because he thinks it'll help his job. He doesn't look at the whole entire agenda to think he's going to be pushing gay marriage and he's going to be pushing, abortion. He's going to be pushing, indoctrinating little children in school to homosexual practices. He doesn't see all that. He just thinks, my little circle, this is better for me financially. And so many of these Muslims, they're genuinely nice and they do want it better for their family, but it inevitably works together because when they move in, they gravitate together. When they gravitate, they get a community. They get an imam. He says to build a mosque, to start following them of the Sharia law closer, and then people move out, and then more move in, and then the violence takes place.
I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it's exactly what we're seeing right now. There's a square block, and it has 5,000 Somali Muslims. And Minnesota has been very open to the Somalians, to have them come here for refuge, and, they get lots of social services and things like that. And, the population has exploded. And I'm a social worker, and I worked in a school, and, they demanded that they have sinks for their feet and that they have prayer rooms. And it's interesting to see how our culture will bend and really just bend over backwards, and there's not any appreciation shown. You can kind of see there's a spiritual component to it that, in the natural people who aren't Christians, they don't get it. But there is definitely, when you start getting large crowds of Muslims in areas, there's a spiritual oppression that comes over that area. And it's amazing because these, a lot of the people, not all Muslims are bad. I'm not saying, I dislike them, but they're very pushy. A lot of them have cab jobs, and there was a big problem because the taxi cab drivers would not transport anyone who had a dog, who had alcoholic beverages, women who were dressed a certain way. And, when you take a job, you got to do the job. And even in that, they let that go. They had discrimination over who they had in their taxis. And a lot of people don't realize that this, like you said, this caving in, this, letting the dominant culture bend to this new culture, it does. It gives them a sense of empowerment. And we're missing that in this country.
Well, and again, I did put together a book, and the title of the book is What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam and the United States, and then a DVD series titled Islamic Conquest, Past and Present, and it gives you the 1,400-year history. It's a fascinating story that if we have time, I'll go into it. But I don't know if you need to take a break now or not.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna take a real quick break, minute break, and then we will be right back. Hang on.
Oh, yeah. Hey, folks, it's Will ZPI, and you guys got to check out CYIWorldwide.com, home of The Grok Show, free MP3s, music, advice, and even prayer support. That, again, is CYIWorldwide.com. Check it out. Join Unituber and Army Girl for Christ as they discuss spiritual warfare, spiritual preparedness, the end times, life issues, and personal and spiritual growth. That's www.truthradionet.com, truthradionet.com.
All right, welcome back to Truth Be Told. We are joined tonight by author, lecturer, William Federer. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be with you, Minister Grok.
Hey, can you tell everyone what your website is and how they can get your materials?
Sure, my website is AmericanMinute.com, and again, that's AmericanMinute.com. And I've written about 20 books on American history and world history, and Chains to Chains, the 6,000-Year Quest for Control, America's God and Country, a book called Backfired, where I trace how every colony in America was started by a different Christian denomination. I actually read through every charter of every colony. Virginia was Anglican, Massachusetts was Puritan, Rhode Island was Baptist, New York was Dutch Reformed, Delaware and New Jersey were Swedish Lutheran, Maryland Catholic, Pennsylvania Quaker, and New Hampshire and Connecticut were Congregationalist. They didn't get along, and they'd chase each other out of each other's colonies, but then they had to work together to fight the King of England during the Revolution. After the Revolution, they said, look, we don't always agree on religion, but you were willing to fight and die for my freedom. I need to let you practice your faith. And so that's when Christians learned how to tolerate each other. In 1776, every state constitution required you to be a Protestant Christian to hold state office, except for four. Pennsylvania, Ben Franklin signed that constitution that said all you had to do was believe in the divine inspiration of the Old and New Testament. Delaware said all you had to do was believe in the Trinity. Maryland said all you had to do was be a Christian. Now, we think of that as narrow-minded. They thought they were being generous because by saying Christian, you could be Protestant or Catholic. And then the most liberal state was the most evangelical. Rhode Island, by Baptists, the belief was true religion from the inside out, not required by the government from the outside in. But every other state, you had to be a Protestant, and then in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire, you had to be a Congregationalist Christian to hold state office in Massachusetts up until 1833. And so they, like a racetrack with 13 lanes, the different states would expand religion at their different speeds. There was a Irish potato famine in 1846, and millions of Irish Catholics came to America, and the Catholic percent went from 2% to 20% in just a few years. And then there was a persecution of Jews in Bavaria, and a bunch of Ashkenazic Jews came over, and that's when different states began to allow them to hold office, like Maryland in 1851. After the Civil War, many states rewrote their constitutions to say all you had to do was believe in God. And then that was in effect up until really 1947 was the Supreme Court case Everson versus Board of Education that began to put the federal courts in charge of religion, and they began to call atheism a religion. And so, for example, in 1970, a draft dodger during the Vietnam War wanted to be a religious conscientious objector, but he was an atheist. And the suit goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said when someone holds beliefs with the same conviction as those who believe in a traditional deity, to that person, those beliefs are their religion. So now the Supreme Court calls atheism a religion. And so to not prefer one religion over the other, they kick God out. And so we go from the country formed by different Christians and different denominations tolerating each other, and then, Catholics and Protestants and Jews and so forth, until now everybody's tolerated except the Christians that started the country, and now we're beginning to tolerate Islam, which specifically says Christians are infidels, and their Quran talks about killing Christians and Jews and so forth. So it's quite an interesting change that we've gone through in a relatively short amount of time. Now, that book, by the way, is called Backfired, A Nation Born for Religious Tolerance No Longer Tolerates the Religion of Its Founders. And then a companion book is called The Original 13. It's a documentary history of religion in America's first 13 states. I didn't mean to get off on that track, so we can get back on the subject if you want. But AmericanMinute.com is where all these books are.
All right. Now you mentioned how we tolerate everything but Christianity. Now, there's this myth going around, and there's billboards in certain countries that says, Islam believes in Jesus too. Now, Jesus is in the Quran. Isa is his name in the Quran. Is this the same Jesus that we believe in?
Muhammad was illiterate. His whole life he could never read and write. His father died before he was born. His mother died when he was 6. His grandfather and guardian died when he was 8. So he was orphaned and taken in by an uncle, Abu Talib, who was a merchant and would take Muhammad on camel rides. He'd go to different cities and hear about the different religions. He'd go to Mecca, which was a pagan city, and had over 360 different pagan gods, and the most popular god was Hubal, the moon god. They had this rock they thought had fallen from the moon, and the pagans kissed the rock, walked around the rock, bowed to the rock 5 times a day. Muhammad kissed that rock, and it got incorporated into Islam. And then Muhammad would go to Persian cities that were Zoroastrian. And the Zoroastrians believed that paradise was sensual. It was filled full of virgins that would fulfill all your desires. He liked that, and it got incorporated into his belief system. And then he would go to Jewish cities. And he couldn't read the Old Testament because he was illiterate, but he heard their oral stories called Talmud and Mishnah. Some of those stories are reflected in Islam. And then he heard the Christian faith. And even Encyclopedia Britannica says the gospel was made known to Muhammad through apocryphal and heretical sources. So Muhammad thought the Trinity was the Father, Mary, and Jesus. Nobody took the time to explain to him the Holy Spirit. And so there's elements of all these different faiths in Islam. And Muhammad was really excited about his new faith. He thought there's something in it for everybody, so consequently everybody will jump on board. And when they didn't, he was disappointed. And that's when he switched to the political and the military phase of his career. But when you look at the Quran, it does have Bible names, but it changes the Bible stories. Has Abraham in there, but he changed the story from Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac to about to sacrifice Ishmael. He has the story of Noah, but changes it to Noah was a prophet of Allah. The people didn't accept the prophet. The people were destroyed. And has the story of Moses, but leaves out the Jews and the blood of the Lamb and changes it to Moses was a prophet of Allah. The people didn't accept the prophet. The people were destroyed. Has the story of David. David was a prophet of Allah. The people didn't accept the prophet. The people got destroyed. And so he's building a case for himself that he's a prophet of Allah. You don't accept him, you get destroyed. Now, he had a little problem with Jesus because Jesus was a prophet, he says, and the people didn't accept the prophet. And so, wait a second, we can't have Jesus get destroyed. That doesn't fit. So Jesus is taken. And so there's some verses that are sort of ambiguous, and they teach that Jesus wasn't killed, but someone that looked like Jesus was put on the cross, and it basically makes God out to be a deceiver. But you have to understand, in Islam, lying is okay, that it's okay to lie to help advance Islam. It's called taqiyya, sacred lying, holy deceit. Matter of fact, you're obligated to lie if the goal is obligatory. And so if you have the Christian faith, Jesus would never have permitted lying to spread the truth. He said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, you know. Well, Islam, an interesting story. Am I going too fast?
No, it's fine.
Muhammad had a warrior who was captured, and he was forced to renounce Muhammad. And he later escaped and went back to Muhammad. And Muhammad forgave him. And Muhammad said, if they make you turn, but don't turn in your heart. So in other words, it's okay to deny Muhammad in a pinch to save your skin, as long as you don't fight against Islam. In other words, it's okay to say you're not a Muslim in order to get elected, but then everything you do after you're elected is to help advance Islam.
Sounds familiar.
And so you say, well, how do you know if somebody really has left Islam? The only way to know is if they're actively fighting against it. And so somebody that says, oh, they're peaceful and they're nice, if they're not actively trying to resist the spread of the fundamental Islam, then they're complicit in trying to spread it. But there's another concept called hudna, which means when you're weak, you make treaties until you get strong enough to disregard them. And this is what James Madison and Thomas Jefferson talked about. The Barbary pirates, the Muslims of North Africa, had been capturing ships from England, France, and Holland, and Sweden. And those countries decided, after they got past the era where they went through the Maruthans and Trinitarians, that Catholic order, but they graduated to paying an annual tribute So these countries would pay millions of dollars to these Muslim pirates to leave their country's ships alone. Well, when America broke from Britain, the Muslims of Morocco said, oh, you're your own country now? You're not part of Britain? Congratulations, you have to pay your own tribute. And so they began to capture our American ships and stick our crews in the dungeons of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. And John Adams was saying, let's pay them the tribute. But the tribute was enormous, millions of dollars. And for a couple of years we did. It amounted to 20% of our federal budget was going to bribe these Muslim pirates. So like today, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build mosques around the world. You say we are? Yeah, Hillary Clinton's U.S. Ambassador's Aid for Cultural Preservation spent $770 million to rebuild mosques in Muslim countries. And this is, they said, oh, it's to help us to build rapport with them. They view it as us paying them tribute, that we are submitting to them as slaves, basically. Well, Thomas Jefferson was sent as an ambassador to France. He and John Adams, in their papers, they write about meeting with the ambassador from Tripoli, Abdurrahman, and they asked this ambassador why they were boarding defenseless American ships with daggers in their teeth and killing and capturing. And Jefferson writes to John Jay in Congress and says the ambassador answered us that it was written in the laws of their prophet and in their Quran that all nations that would not acknowledge Islam's authority were sinners, and it was their right and duty to make them slaves and take them captive. And any Muslim who shall die in battle is sure to go to paradise, where he gets his 72 virgins. So there's actually a sexual motivation to fight and die in jihad. Mm-hmm. But and so Jefferson arranged for John Paul Jones, the father of the American Navy, you know, the Battle of the Serapis, and, you know, I've not yet begun to fight, John Paul Jones. He arranged for him to fight the Muslims on the Black Sea for Catherine the Great of Russia. Finally, Thomas Jefferson becomes the third president, and he gets fed up with us paying this tribute, and he sends in the Marines. And that's where we get the Marine Anthem, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, North Africa. And Marines are called leathernecks because they made these wide leather belts that would go around their neck so that if the Muslims tried to chop their head off, the sword wouldn't go through the hardened leather. And so that's why Marines are called leathernecks. And then after they won, they confiscated the Muslim sword, and the Muslim slave soldiers were called Mamluks, and so it's the Mamluk sword. And anyway, Jefferson had them agree to a treaty, and then they broke the treaty, and James Madison became the president. He had to send in our Marines again. They made a treaty, then they broke the treaty. And John Quincy Adams, our sixth president, says that in Islam, treachery and violence are articles of their religion, and talked about how that the Muslim port and the Muslim Dey of Algiers said, write your treaty as you will, but know that when we are strong, it will be as waste paper, and we'll fight you again. And anyway, after the French Revolution, the Muslims began to lose their military advantage. The West was developing artillery and cannons and so forth, and they were slipping behind. And in the early 1800s, Greece broke away from the Ottoman Empire. And then in the middle 1800s, parts of Wallachia and Moldova and Bulgaria and Albania tried to break away. And in the late 1800s, a little country named Armenia wanted to break away from the Ottoman Empire too. And the Muslim Sultan, Abdul Hamid, killed 100,000 of them. And then he's chased out to France because France had made a treaty with the Ottomans. And then 3 young Turkish generals took over Turkey. They were called the Young Turks. And they killed 1.5 million Armenians. Sort of like we stood by while the Arab Muslims in northern Sudan killed over 2 million Africans in the southern part of Sudan, and we just let it happen. Right. They almost called it a genocide, but then they were afraid to. And we're just twiddling our thumbs while they're being murdered. That's what happened with Armenia. And Hitler was asked how he thought he could get away with killing the Jews. He said the world did nothing when the Muslims killed 1.5 million Armenians between 1915 and 1922. You know, the book of Revelation lists 7 churches that the Apostle John writes a letter to.
Right.
Well, there was a church in Smyrna all the way up until 1922, and that's when the Muslims came in and pulled a Byzantine Greek Orthodox priest out of the church and dismembered him in the street. And so this happened, and after that, there was a leader in Turkey named Ataturk, and he was a nice guy. He decided to get rid of the burqas and the veils and the fezzes. He told the people to dress in business suits and dress Western, and he put the military in charge of making sure that the government would not turn fundamentalist fanatic again. And so, every now and then, the military would intervene and stop the government from becoming fundamental. That's the way it was up until 2 years ago, when a fundamentalist Muslim pretended to be a moderate and got elected president. As soon as he got elected president, he arrested all the military leaders, and now he's taking Turkey in a fundamentalist fanatic direction again, with the goal of reestablishing the Ottoman Empire, and that is what the Muslim Brotherhood wants to do. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to reestablish the caliphate, the Muslim world controlled by one caliph, one Muslim leader, and then their goal is to expand and take over the world and have the entire world be Muslim, ruled by one Muslim caliph. And
now,
that's why a lot of
I'm sorry, can you explain to listeners what Sharia law is that they follow and that they institute in these countries?
Sharia law is trying to be like Muhammad. And what Muhammad permitted is permitted, that's halal. What Muhammad did not permit is not permitted, that's haram. So Muhammad had multiple wives. Muhammad had a wife that was as young as 6 years old. Muhammad allowed his men to beat their wives. All you had to do to divorce your wife was say, I divorce you. Muhammad said that it takes 2 women to testify against one man because a woman's mind is deficient. Muhammad said, I saw heaven and there's very few women there, and the only ones that are there are young virgins that the guys have sex with. And he says, I saw hell and it's mostly women. Wow. And so in Sharia law, a man can beat his wife. The wife cannot leave her house without being accompanied by a male relative, and she has to be covered with a veil or a burqa or a hijab. If she is not covered and not accompanied by a male relative, she could be raped. And if she's raped, it's her fault because she allowed herself to be used as a tool of Satan to help the man. And so in the West, if a woman is raped, you put the rapist in jail. Well, in the Muslim countries and in the neighborhoods where Sharia takes over, if a woman is raped, she's the one who's put in jail. So like last year in Bangladesh, a 40-year-old man raped his 14-year-old niece. When the Muslim imam found out about it, they sent the religious police to the house, and they arrested the girl. They brought her out and whipped her 100 times. She died after the 70th whip.
Wow.
And CNN reported it. And so this is Sharia law. It takes place in the world today, and it's taking place in neighborhoods in America. And how do they do it? Immigrate, increase, eliminate. The first ones come in as immigrants, 1 or 2 here or there, and they're really nice. Everybody meets them. They say they're nice. They say there's nothing to worry about. Let more in. More come in, they gravitate together, and they build a little community, and they get an imam, and they build a mosque. They become more visible. He teaches them to follow the Quran closer and follow the laws, wear the burqas and the veils. People move out of the neighborhoods. More Muslims move in, and those that refuse to move out, that's when violence takes place, and there's no witnesses, and they take over the neighborhood and establish Sharia law in that neighborhood. It's a very effective strategy, and again, it's worked for 1,400 years, and it's working today, and we're sort of allowing it, and our president and administration is helping to facilitate it. So we're in a time of change in America.
A big change. And you know, there's not a lot of protest to the, you know, they're slipping in the Sharia law. We're letting little things, you know, pass one by one, and they're really growing a lot more powerful. Now, as Christians, it's our responsibility to not hate them, to not despise them. We're supposed to love everyone because we're all sinners. So our responsibility is to love them. But what is our responsibility as Christians and Americans to do about preserving American culture, preserving our laws and our Christian heritage in the face of all of this?
Well, again, religious, political, military. Religious, we do not force the conscience. Christianity can really never be forced. It's a voluntary decision that God wants to appeal to your heart and your mind and have you make a voluntary decision. But that concept is a Judeo-Christian concept. You know, the Old Testament law, God said, here's the blessings, here's the cursings, choose life. It's up to you to choose. Adam and Eve, here's the tree, you know, don't eat from it, but it's up to you to choose. So God, the Judeo-Christian God, is not into forcing. Not so with Allah. The Islamic God, you can be forced on threat or pain of death to convert. So where, you know, Jewish and Christian concepts are faith is from the inside out, Islam can be forced from the outside in. So as a religion, we do not force anybody's conscience. But we also have to realize that Islam is a political system and a military system. As a political and military system, it is totalitarian. So let's say that you're a Christian and the Bloods and the Crips and the MS-13 gang moves into the neighborhood, and they begin to do their laws. Pimps, prostitutes, gangland killings, lynchings. Are we supposed to say, you're now taking over the neighborhood, I'm just going to move out and let you be the law here? And our government and our police says, okay, yeah, you have to let them practice their law, it's now their neighborhood. Let's say the KKK takes over a neighborhood and begins to do lynchings and kill people and, you know, and burns, you know, crosses and, you know, they're sort of religious, right? Should we let them? What if the mafia takes over a neighborhood? I mean, everybody's seen The Godfather, you know, they go to church, and so they're sort of religious, and so we should say, oh, well, you're sort of a religious group, and we're going to let you take over. And so they do their justice, and if you leave their group, you get killed, like in Islam. If you leave Islam, you get killed. And so does the fact that a group takes over a neighborhood, does that give them the right to put in a new political system and a military violence system in the neighborhood? And so we have to understand that there's three things we're dealing with here. So if the Bloods and the Crips simply said, we are religious, these are our religious beliefs, and then the ACLU comes to their defense and says, yeah, they should be able to take over neighborhoods and do their killings and prostitutes and pimps and so forth. You know, what if Hitler called Nazism a religion? Would we have said, oh, excuse me, it's a religion? Well, teach it in our schools that Jews are Untermenschen and it's okay to send them to the gas chamber. You know, what if Stalin says that communism is a religion? Well, it's a belief system, right? So we need to allow it. And so it's a brilliant strategy. You have a political system that you put a costume on and call it a religious system, and then it gets a free rein.
Right.
And so that's what we're dealing with. Now, I do believe there are Muslims that just want to be religious Muslims. They just want to practice their faith. Do I agree with their faith? No. But I don't think that as long as they just want to hold their beliefs, that's fine. But when they begin to make everybody else accommodate them, that's when it's not fine. When they want to say that you can't, practice your faith publicly. So when Muslims take over neighborhoods, it is no longer permissible for a Christian to share their faith, to proselytize. And so if you today were to go to Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia and you would want to share your faith, you would get killed. Why? Because their law says that you can't. And so in America, we have a freedom of speech. In my book, What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, I compare Sharia law with the Constitution. So we have a First Amendment that says there's freedom of religion. You can join one, you can leave one. Sharia law says you can join, but you can't leave. It's the death penalty. It's called the Ridda laws, R-I-D-D-A, Ridda. And we have a freedom of speech. You can talk about stuff. You can criticize religions, right? Islam, they don't. If you insult Allah, you get killed. If you insult Muhammad, you get killed. We have a freedom of assembly. In Sharia law, Dini, which is what they call non-Muslims, Christians and Jews, they cannot assemble freely. You could go on and on. Well, we have a Second Amendment, the right to possess and bear arms. in Islam, non-Muslims are forbidden to own weapons. We have a 13th Amendment outlawing slavery. In Islam, they allow slavery because Muhammad owned slaves. Muhammad was a white man. He was a white Arab. In the Hadith, it talks about him raising his arms in prayer, and they saw the whiteness of his armpits. And somebody's riding in a donkey along next to Muhammad going to early morning prayer, and he says, I rubbed up against and I saw the whiteness of his thigh, and Muhammad owned African slaves. And he said some pretty derogatory things about them that I won't repeat on the radio. And so when you understand that Muhammad owned slaves and he was the perfect Muslim, then it's okay for Muslims today to own slaves. And again, there's slavery that's taking place today. So there's an incompatibility with Sharia law and our American law. And as long as we just look at Islam as a religion, we lose. They get a free rein to take over and establish their political system, neighborhood by neighborhood, and then by city, and then by state, and so forth. But if we take the change and says, okay, it is a religion, but it's also a political and a military system, and as that, it needs to be treated as that. And so if we're going to if we're going to let them practice Sharia law, then we have to let the Bloods and the Crips take over neighborhoods and practice their gang warfare. We have to be able to let the KKK and the Mafia take over neighborhoods and practice their stuff. So anyway, it's in a book I wrote called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam in the United States, and then a DVD set is called Islamic Conquest, Past and Present. And AmericanMinute.com is my website.
Wow. I mean, so much information tonight, and we could probably go on for 7 more hours. There's just so much, but I think we hit on some really important things. The 3 strategies that they use, because we're seeing it play out right before our eyes in our country. And where do you see all this going, to sum up the whole show? Where do you see them going in the United States? Do you think this is going to stop, that Americans are going to put an end to it, or do you see this being carried out a little further?
Well, people are beginning to wake up, but I think those pushing this agenda are realizing people are waking up, so they're trying to push their agenda faster. And so it's a mad dash for the gate, and we'll see what happens. And, I'm hopeful that we can wake up people. But you see how far it's gone so far, and I would have thought that people would have woken up before now. So it's pretty critical. I've talked to people in the military, and they are basically being told that if they criticize Islam in any way at all, they could be, demoted or kicked out, or I actually spoke on a military base, and afterwards I had one of the generals write me a letter thanking me, saying, you've made a great impact on our command, and they said, we've only been taught that we have to be sensitive to their culture, that we have to be really careful not to insult them. And they had a reading list of books that they wanted to understand the Muslim mind and so forth. And I had to sort of chuckle, and I said, well, you have to understand, when Muslims conquer a people, the people they conquer are forbidden to insult them. And so when you go in there really, really super careful not to insult them, you are posturing yourself as the loser. You're sending them signals, and again, they've been around 1,400 years. They know warfare. They know when they're winning. They know when they're losing. And when you go in there, really, really careful not to insult them, you're sending them a signal that you've lost, they've won. And so it's a catch-up game of educating people. I'm enjoying it, talking to people, and there's a fascinating history in the book I wrote, where I go through the conquering of Syria. Syria's in the news today. Did you know Syria was the first country to completely be Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul? Antioch, Syria was the first city where Christians were called Christians. And they had churches in Baghdad and Babylon and Persia and India and Mongolia. They're called Nestorian Christians. Kublai Khan's mom was a Nestorian Christian. In the 6th century, the Tang dynasty in China had a thriving Syrian Christian community with these big stones that they found that have a Chinese writing and Syrian writing on them. But they were largely wiped out by the Muslim leader Tamerlane and so forth. But I think I'm probably out of time. But I'd love to be on again with you sometime. And again, AmericanMinute.com is my website.
We would definitely love to have you back on. There's so much more to discuss, and I think it's really going to give a lot of people something to think about, and how we approach things. And, maybe it's time to turn off the football game and really start, wondering about what's going on in the world. Because I'm sure if the Muslims took a stand against football and tried to get the football game shut down or American Idol, then people would wake up. So we're just going to have to pray that, God's going to have his way either way, no matter what happens. And we just need to pray for our nation and pray that people will wake up to what's going on. And I thank you.
I will make one plug for a ChristForAllPeoples.org. I'll say that again, ChristForAllPeoples.org. It's a website where they even give out free DVDs of the movie The Life of Jesus, and it's one that has been translated into hundreds of languages, and everybody's probably seen it at least once. But anyway, this DVD has the life of Jesus based on the book of Luke in 16 different Muslim languages. So the idea is you get a stack of them, carry them around in your purse, and if a Muslim lady crosses your path with a burqa, you give it to her as a present. I've done this. They've been very thankful. Most of them are taught, as you mentioned, that Jesus is a prophet, but they don't know anything about him. And so this is a really easy way. You don't have to know everything I know about Islam. All you need to do is say, there's a lady with a burqa. I got this in my purse or my notebook. I'm going to give it to her as a present. Are any of these languages yours? And they say, yeah, this one's Somali or Urdu or, Farsi and Persian. And you give it to them. And millions of Muslims have come to faith in Jesus. They don't necessarily like to use the word Christian because of all the connotations, but they will become followers of Jesus. And millions of them have. And so there's a situation going on where there's a revival of people converting in Persia, in Iran.
Amen.
So we're talking about war with Iran, but because the Ayatollah and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad squelched that democracy demonstration and have been killing a lot of these pro-democracy leaders, the people there are becoming disillusioned with fundamental Islam, and as a consequence, lots of them are becoming Christian. So we have this situation where there's, darkness on one side but light on the other, and we need to do that. But ChristForAllPeoples.org is that website, but I'll let you go for this evening.
All right, and thank you so much, Bill, for being on the show, and I'll be in contact. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you.
Okay, God bless you.
God bless.
All right, be sure to check out his website, which is AmericanMinute.com. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. This is a new song by the Newsboys, God's Not Dead.
Love is slow and bring the dead to fall. Come shake the ground with the sound of revival. Let heaven roar and fire fall. Come shake the ground with the sound of revival.
Amen. Our God's not dead. He's not rotting in a grave like Muhammad is. Our God is alive. Our God heals. Our God saves. Our God delivers. Our God gives hope. Our God tells us to love one another, to love people. Our Bible tells us to not lie. It tells us our testimony is so important. For those who think that we can combine Islam with Christianity, for the sake of peace, the Bible tells us when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction is going to come, and that day is coming quickly. When I announced the show and I put it on Facebook and I sent out invitations to people, I have gotten more hate mail and fiery response to this show than probably any show in the 275 shows that we've done. From Christians, mind you, not even from Muslims. People say, oh, you're supporting Islam. We don't need to talk about this. And, I'm part of some Zionist plot to keep the world fighting, and it's a New World Order plot that, if we fight against the Muslims, then we're too distracted and they can take over. All kinds of craziness. But the truth of it is, we need to know what they believe, lest we fall into deception, or lest people, Christians, fall into deception. They say, oh, well, they have Jesus in their Bible. Their Jesus is the prophet that's coming back to tell people, I lied. I'm really not the Son of God. Islam is the way. And according to them, he's going to come back and break all crosses. He's going to come back and he's going to persecute anyone who doesn't turn over to Islam, anyone who doesn't accept Muhammad and bow to Allah. This is their Jesus, the Jesus who lied and deceived and really didn't go to the cross. This is not the Jesus of our Bible, the Jesus who is the spotless lamb, who is the perfect sacrifice for our sins. It is not the one that's in the Bible. And we have to be careful because this show is not about hate. It's not about hating Muslims, because we don't hate anyone. We're not called to hate. We're called to love. But we're also called as Christians to give a response. If anyone asks the reason for the hope we have to be prepared with an answer. And I'll tell you, I've spent time witnessing to Muslims, doing street ministry to Muslims, and it's difficult. They're very rooted in what they believe, and they have some certain preconceived notions, distortions about what Christianity is. So if you're not rooted in your own Bible and you don't know what they believe, it becomes very hard to be an effective witness for Christ. So two things. We need to be rooted and grounded in the Word of God, to know what the Word of God says, to know who Jesus was, to know these things so you can dispute the apostasy, so you can be able to make a case for what we do. And second, you need to know what they believe. And that's why we did this show, not to incite hate against Muslims, but to bring understanding to Christians about what we're up against. You know, the speaker made a point. You know, they come in, they take over, they populate, and then, you know, they start to push out people, and the nations become Muslim nations. They're very strategic. And we need to know the plans of the enemy. The Bible says we are not to be ignorant of our adversary's schemes. And Satan is using this. And we need to stand up as Christians. We don't need to bow down to everyone who comes in and be so tolerant of their beliefs. We need to be strong in what we believe. If you believe as a Christian that we have the absolute truth, that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and that our God is alive, and our God is the only God, the only true God, then you need to make that stand. Because we know what the Bible says. If you deny him before men, he will deny you before the Father. We need to be strong in what we believe. Strong. We need to proclaim the gospel in love to these people. Because a lot of Muslims who have converted, a lot of Muslims who came to know Christ for one reason. If you ask many of them, they'll say, because of the love. There was a prominent son of a ruler in one of the Muslim nations, and it totally slips my head right now. But he was on CNN. He was on all these stations, and he proclaimed that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And when they asked him, you know, they said, you could be killed. You can't proclaim this. What are you doing? And you're coming on national television and places around the world and proclaiming this. Are you crazy? They said, what could have made you convert from being a Muslim to being a Christian? And he said, someone showed him the verse in the Bible that said, love your enemies. And that was all it took. And the Spirit of God was over him. And we're seeing a lot of these things happening in the Muslim countries. And it's not because of our words or our arguments, it's because they see the love of God. The Holy Spirit draws men in. And it's that love that they're missing. You know, we're told to be honorable person, to follow what Jesus did, to follow the example of Christ. And he was loving, and he was selfless, and he was pure, and all of these things that they don't have in Islam. So remember these things. But yet we still have to make a stand. We cannot let the enemy come in and take over and build mosques in Times Square. When they build a mosque somewhere, it's a sign of victory. It's a sign of that they've conquered, that they've won. And that's why there was such a big deal at where the Twin Towers were to not build a mosque there. When you build that mosque, they're saying, we won. And to them, we look weak. We're in war. When you're in war, you don't go in, oh, we want to respect you. Oh, we don't want to cause too much trouble for you. We're in war. If we're there, too bad. We're Christians. We're a Christian nation. We're there, too bad. It's time that we step up. It's time that we wake up to what's going on in the world around us. If you ever wondered how there'll be a one-world government, how there'll be a one-world religion, how all of this stuff will happen, look around you. Look around you. What are people worried about? When you're at work, when you're around people, what do they talk about? They're not talking about Jesus Christ. They're not talking about how we're losing our liberties, how we're losing our freedoms, how we're going into totalitarianism, how we have a president who may or may not even be eligible to be the president. They don't care. They're worried about American Idol. They're worried about who's on Dancing with the Stars. They're worried about that stupid Snooki and Jersey Shore and our football team and all things that don't matter. Bread and circus, like they did in the Roman Empire. We need to be on our knees. We need to pray for our nation. We are in so much trouble. But the Bible tells us that these things are going to happen. And the Bible tells us when we start seeing all this craziness in the world, terrorism, pestilences, wars against kingdoms and nationalities, famine, when we see all these things happen at one time, earthquakes, signs in the heavens, in the stars, that we're to look up. Why? For redemption draws nigh. We are entering a period in time like there has never been in the history of humanity, and like there never will be again. These times are coming. We're watching this because we're discerning the seasons like Jesus told us. We don't know the exact day or time that Jesus will return, but he told us to be aware of the season, to discern what's going on around us. And this is what we see. Let's stand up. Let's be out there. Let's be active in our faith, proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, getting people saved, snatching souls out of the fire. Let's really take some time and reevaluate our priorities. Where does your heart lie? Where does your treasures lie? Because where your treasures lie, that's where your heart is. Where your focus is, that's where your heart is. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hear our cry, Lord, we pray. Our faces down, our hands are raised. You called us out, we turned away, we turned away. With shipwrecked faith, the idols rise. We do what is right in our own eyes. Our children now will pay the price. We need your light, Lord, shine your light. If we've ever needed you, Lord, it's now. Lord, it's now. We are desperate for your hand. We're reaching out. We're reaching out. All our hearts, all our strength, with all our minds, we're at your feet. May your kingdom come in our hearts and lives. Let your church arise. Let your church arise. If we've ever needed you, Lord, it's now. Lord, it's now. We are desperate for your hand. We're reaching out. We're reaching out. We're reaching out. If we've ever needed you, Lord, it's now. Lord, it's now. We're desperate for your hand. We're reaching out. We're reaching out. If we've ever needed you, Lord, it's now. Lord, it's now. We are desperate for your hand. We're reaching out. We're reaching out. We need you now. Revive us now. We need you now.
Oh, yeah. Hey, folks, it's Will ZPI, and you guys got to check out CYIWorldwide.com home of The Grok Show, free MP3s, music, advice, and even prayer support. That again is CYIworldwide.com. Check it out.
All right, I want to thank every one of you who was here tonight. Thank you to everyone over at CYI.com in our chat room. It's always nice to have you guys there. Thank you for your support. Thank you to everyone in the Blog Talk chat room. We don't usually open our Blog Talk chat room. We usually stick to the one at CYI, but we opened it tonight. And for all of you in there, thank you so much for joining us live and listening in. If you're listening to this later on at the rebroadcast at CYI or the MP3, thank you for taking the time and joining us. Be sure to check out our guest's website, which is the AmericanMinute.com. Some great books and great materials there from our guest tonight, who is William Federer. We give a special thanks to him for joining us. It was truly a blessing. I hope you learned something tonight. I hope something you heard lit a fire under you and challenged you to get out there. You know, we need to go out, and these people need to hear the love of Christ. We also need to stand our ground as Americans, stand our ground for our liberties, to keep our freedoms, and to just really be a witness for Christ. And if part of your task is being a witness for Christ, we have to remember what to do with that. Christ said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And when Jesus was on the earth, he didn't bother himself with the Roman Empire. He didn't bother, trying to reform the government of that time, because that wasn't his job. He knew there was people hurting, there were people sick, there were people dying, and he came to bring hope. So likewise, if we're following his example, where are your priorities? Are you so busy trying to reform the government and rebel against the government and do this and do that? Or are you worried about the people who are sick, who are hurting, and who need hope? Because that's truly where we should be, giving people hope who are out there and who are hurting. Hey, again, it's been so nice having you join us tonight. And we have a lot more shows this week. We're on 7 days a week, and the schedule is always at CYIworldwide.com. Click on Grok Radio, and we hope you'll join us again. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Hey, celebration.